Alrighty, if you're watching this, that means you've done your bell ringer. If you haven't done your bell ringer, stop what you're doing, open up that video, and complete it. Okay, so what are we learning in this new term? We're still on some life science, but we're kind of shifting gears a little bit. We're kind of zooming out because we've been looking at teeny tiny things that happen within our body. We've been doing a lot of that. We're going to look at life science at a bigger scale. So what's happening in the world around us. So today's standard, we are going to use various scientific resources to analyze the historical findings of Charles Darwin. What does all that mean? Basically, what we're going to be able to do after today's lesson is explain the basic principles of natural selection. Maybe you've heard of natural selection before. Maybe you've even heard of Charles Darwin before. If not, you're in for a treat. So let's get to it. You should have your guided notes pulled up. Remember, you're just going to follow along with this video and fill in each blank as I fill in the blanks. It's easy peasy, easy points. This shouldn't be any big deal. Okay, so let's get to it. Who the heck is Charles Darwin anyway? So, Charles Darwin was born in England in 1809, so a long time ago, and he's English, so he has a very English-sounding name. He kind of looks like an old grumpy Santa Claus, not very good looking man, but it is what it is. So he was a naturalist. What does that mean? That just means that he studied nature. He's a naturalist. Kind of a cool title. So what's the big deal about Charles Darwin? Why do we care about him? So Darwin took, a long time ago in the 1800s, he took a voyage, which is another word for journey, a long trip, to a place called the Galapagos Islands. And I spelled it wrong. Galapagos Islands. Kind of a fun name, Galapagos. So why did he go there? He went there to study the plants and animals, because again, that's his job. He's supposed to be studying nature. So he took this big ship called the HMS Beagle, kind of a weird name, and he had to take a ship because we didn't have airplanes yet, not until like 100 years later. And he traveled all the way from England to down here where the Galapagos Islands are located. So we're up here in North America. Mississippi's like right there. And then there's South America. It's like directly west of South America. So just right below us. It's gorgeous. If I were paid more, I would go myself. But that's what it looks like. He went there to study the plants and animals because there are a lot of different plants and animals at the Galapagos Islands. Pretty cool. So what did he do there? While he was there, he discovered and formed a lot about what we know about nature today. And he wrote many books, but one of his most popular books that he wrote about his discoveries is called On the Origin of Species. I cannot type today, I'm a little rusty. Okay, so On the Origin of Species. If you go to college and take a biology class, meaning life science class, you're probably going to read a little bit from this book. It's not the most exciting book, I'm just going to be honest, but it is what it is. Okay, so again, why do we even care about Charles Darwin? Why are we talking about some old white guy from the 1800s? Who cares? So, he's important because he was the first to develop a lot of ideas about something called evolution. Okay, you may have heard about evolution before. You may have heard some crazy things about it. We're going to talk about it. It's not as crazy as sometimes the news or people try to claim that it is. A lot of people think that you can't believe in God and evolution, but they're really unrelated. We'll break that down a little bit later, but evolution. So what is evolution? Evolution is just the process by which populations change over long periods of time. So if you ever hear the word evolve, that's just another word for change. So different populations are going to change over long periods of time. So this isn't going to happen within a year. It's not even going to happen within 100 years. It's usually thousands and thousands of years that this is going to take place. Okay, so like if you look at this lizard over here, over time, its different traits are evolving, they're changing, they're shifting, so a species will look one way thousands of years ago, and over time they might not look totally the same. Or if you're into Pokemon, they talk about evolution sometimes, about how the different Pokemon evolve. So that's what that's about. Okay, what do I mean when I say populations though? Like what is a population? So a population is just all of the individuals of a certain species that live in one area at a time. So if you think about rabbits, there are rabbits all over the United States, but they might be a little different depending on where they live. So like the rabbits down here in Mexico might look a little different than the rabbits up here in the north, maybe in Michigan or New York. So they're the same species, they're still those types of rabbits, but it's a different population because they live in different areas. It's just like living in different towns, right? So what is a species though? A species is a group of closely related organisms or living things that mate or reproduce to make offspring. So rabbits in this case that we're talking about, those are the same species because they can reproduce and can make more rabbits. Okay, so how did Darwin find out all of these things about evolution and species and population? What happened back in the day? So what he did was he collected a bunch of different finches, which is a type of bird, while he was at the Galapagos Islands. So he basically walked around, collected birds, and studied them. Kind of boring, but whatever. Every finch was from the same exact species. So these finches were able to reproduce and make more finches. But they were in different populations. So he picked some birds from one part of the island, he picked different birds from another part of the island, and he studied them and compared them. He noticed that the different populations of finches all had different types of beaks, even though they were the same exact species. So here we have a finch with like a shorter, sharp beak. Here we have a finch with a long, curvy beak. Here's one with a thick, short beak. I don't know, all different types of beaks. Now we already talked about this before, but just as a refresher, those different types of traits that you can see within a species or within a population, that is called that variation. Because they vary, they are different from each other. So the different types of beaks, those are variations. That's what he noticed about the finches in the Galapagos Islands. Now, another thing about the beaks, though, he didn't seem to think that they were totally random. Like, they had certain beak shapes and sizes for a specific reason. And he noticed that they seemed to match the food that was available for their population. So what do I mean by that? And I'm going to go over here, make that picture a little bit bigger so you can see it. So you'll see, here's the bird with a short, thick beak, and he noticed that the food that was available for that specific population in that specific area, that beak seemed to be helpful in collecting the food that was available. So this bird had available big, hard seeds. So he has the beak that's going to be helpful in cracking open that seed so he can eat the actual seed and what's inside of it. If you look over here, we have a bird with a beak that's able to pick up a stick, which is kind of weird. And the food that's best available to that finch were these little insects that lived inside trees. So this beak helped this finch be able to pick at the trees and get all those insects so he could eat. So the beaks that these birds had weren't really by accident. They seemed to match perfectly and were really well suited to their environment. So what do we call that? An inherited trait that is well suited for the environment or that's going to help that specific organism survive, we call that an adaptation. You may have heard this word before. So pretty much every species, even humans, have certain adaptations that are helpful and help them survive in their environment. Some of them are a little weirder than others. If you look at this lizard, this guy can squirt blood from his eyeball. I'm so glad people can't do that. That would be terrifying. So why is that helpful? How is that even an adaptation? Well, if I were some type of predator and I was looking for a lizard to eat, and this lizard just started squirting blood out of its eye, I would probably back away. I wouldn't mess with that lizard. So that's going to help it survive. It's going to scare off predators. Or if you think about a wasp being able to sting you, that's also an adaptation. It's going to help it survive. It's going to be able to fight and, get different species to not want to mess with it. So those are adaptations. And in this case, the finches had that perfect adaptation with the beaks to help it get this food that it needs. Pretend these aren't filled in. No spoilers, no spoilers. Okay, so Darwin proposed a long time ago, that all these finches had similar beaks for a reason. But he figured that a long, long time ago, when these finches first were born or first arrived at the island, they probably had beaks that were similar. And then as these birds moved to new areas, as they spread out into different populations, he figured over time those beaks must have changed or evolved to form the beaks that he was seeing at that time. So maybe a long time ago they all had beaks that looked like this, but as this bird moved to an area on the island that had only the thick seeds, that positive trait of having a shorter beak was passed down and passed down and passed down until over a long period of time they went through evolution, like we talked about on that second slide, to form the beak size that you see now. Same with these other beak types. Over long periods of time, the beaks shifted or evolved or changed to form what they see now. So that process that's making that evolution happen, that is what we call natural selection. Okay, so what is natural selection? Let's break it down one more time. Natural selection is the process by which organisms or living things will inherit or have passed down advantageous. So advantageous looks like the word advantage, which we've talked about is a positive thing. It gives them the upper hand. It's an advantageous trait that will help them reproduce more successfully than other organisms do. What does that mean? If we look at this picture right here, we have a bunch of giraffes. Now, an advantageous or positive trait in this scenario is going to be a long neck because the food that they need to survive is high up in a tree. So the longer the neck, the better because they are more likely to reach that food. Now, these giraffes over here, they have short necks, so they can't reach the food. That is a bad trait to have in this case, right? So since these giraffes can't reach the food, not to harsh your Thursday, but they're probably going to die. They're going to starve. They can't eat. So since these giraffes are dying, they won't be reproducing and making new offspring. So the only traits that are being passed down in this population are going to be the traits from the giraffes that survive, or the long neck. So over time, you're going to see giraffes have longer and longer necks. You're not going to really see giraffes with short necks in the future because they're not being passed down. Those giraffes are dying. If you look at this video over here with the lizard, in this case, the bugs are being eaten by the lizard, right? Now, if they are camouflaging or blending into that leaf, they're more likely to survive because the lizard's not going to see the bug to eat it. It's just going to miss it altogether. So over time, you're going to see these brown bugs. You're not going to see too many of them because they're not surviving, so they're not reproducing or making new offspring. Okay, natural selection can get a little complicated, so we're actually going to take a whole nother week really digesting it and breaking it down. But if you have any questions about anything we talked about today, please hit me up. If not, you are good to go, and I will see you tomorrow.